Okay, it's 1 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started, and then people can join as they come on. But welcome to our From the Field. Today we are talking about glyphosate alternatives with Dr. Albert Adjesiwor from the University of Idaho Extension Office in Kimberly. He's the weed scientist. And we just have questions for him about, there's obviously the price of glyphosate. Roundup has gotten much, much higher, up to 300% higher in the past year. And there's a lot of conversation surrounding Roundup with lawsuits and health, people who think it's unhealthy. So we are going to talk about some alternatives to that. And Albert, I'll let you just go ahead and get started. You can introduce yourself a bit if you want, but tell us the pros and cons of glyphosate for pre-plant burn down in wheat and what some of those alternatives are.
Thank you, Brittany, and thank you to Garrett and Casey for making this happen. I know Corey has been really instrumental in getting some of this going in the past too. So thank you for having me. And once again, my name is Albert Adjesiwor, and I am the Extension Weed Specialist. So today, I would just like to start this conversation about glyphosate alternatives and then some trials that were funded by the Wheat Commission and Barley Commission. There are a couple of slides on here, or most of them that I have talked about in the past, but I don't know if all of you here have seen some of these presentations. So I'll still go through some of that. And then if you have any questions, please stop me at any time. And I'll have my contact information at the end of the presentation, and you can contact me at any time with questions that you have. So Brittany started talking about some of the issues we see with glyphosate, meaning that it's getting expensive. Also, we have some weeds that have already developed resistance to glyphosate. And then also just the public view of glyphosate in general. And so like glyphosate has been a very important tool for weed management, pre-plant, just because it controls almost any weed it comes to contact with. So it controls a lot of broadleaves and grassy weeds. And then also it used to be cheaper compared to a lot of herbicides. So it works well. It used to be cheaper. And also it hasn't stuck in the soil for a long time. And so if you apply glyphosate today, you might be able to plant your grains tomorrow. And so to find an alternative to glyphosate, it has to do those things that glyphosate does. It has to control all the weeds or most of the weeds that you have. It has to be you have to leave little residue in the soil. So that means that you can apply and then plant wheat the next day or just shortly thereafter. And on top of that, you have to be economical. And we use glyphosate as a benchmark. And so now that the price of glyphosate is going up, we probably open the room for some of these chemistries to be used for pre-plant burn down. And also I added that last point that if you are selecting a replacement for glyphosate, you would have to ask yourself, is this herbicide the one that I use most in my wheat crop? For example, if you spray dicamba or a lot of like 2,4-D in your grains, and then you should just try and stay away from that for pre-plant burn down, because if you rely on that tool too often, you might start selecting for resistance. And so this table is just a list of some of the herbicide options. So the first one is glyphosate that we all use for pre-plant burn down. And then we have pyraflufen or Gramoxone on that. And then the third one is a group 14 herbicide, Reviton. I don't know how widespread that is. I don't know if you can find it in your local dealership to buy it, but it's a group 14 herbicide recently labeled for pre-plant burn down in wheat. The first three would control both broadleaves and grasses. As I said, if you are looking for a replacement, you want something that would do something that Roundup does. And then there are a couple of herbicides that would only control your broadleaf weeds, and so like kochia, Russian thistle, common lamb's quarters. And then this will be your aim, and aim is also labeled for use in crop, and Sharpen. Sharpen is a good 14 herbicide. If you apply at high enough rate, around 4 ounces, you'll get some soil activity as well. So to control and to give you pre-emergent weed control as well. And we have bromoxynol and a lot of products that contains bromoxynol. So Brox and Maestro, Bactrol. And then we have Vida, and Vida is mostly like a desiccant, so it acts really fast, just like you see for paraquat and then Sharpen. And then dicamber is a good for herbicide. It's relatively less expensive, and so it will only control broadleaf weeds. And so if you have broadleaf weed, dicamber is a very good and a very good tank mix partner for glyphosate if you are applying those in addition. Then we have QLEX, which has a group 2 and group 4 herbicide in it, and that would also give you only broadleaf control. And the last on the list will be your group 1 herbicide, and so that would be like your select, your Assure 2 post. And I would mention that this Assure 2 is the same active ingredient in aggressor if you are planting a coaxium wheat for weed control and for grains. So I'll start with the glyphosate. I'm just gonna go through some of these first, and then I would end the presentation with some general recommendation, some of the trial results. So glyphosate, we use Roundup Power Max a lot, the regular Power Max, but we have Power Max 3 that has a high load of Roundup. I talk with the industry reps. They want to focus more this towards Roundup ready crops. They are coming with a new kind of similar formulation for dry land, which you call RT something, and that will be kind of more useful to dry land growers. But basically, it's going to be the same formulation as the Power Max 3, and supposedly it has like kind of better load of surfactant, and that should probably perform better in dry land conditioning. So we have some of this included in our trial to see if it does well in dry land conditions. M, as I mentioned, is very low use rate, 0.5 to 2 ounces an acre. And you have to apply, you can apply this even after the weed comes down. And so if you have broadleaf weeds, and this will give you a pretty decent suppression of broadleaf weeds. If you want to control weed better, so especially if you are taller, like 4 inches and above, you would have to include something else in the tank. And it's a group 14 herbicide. And so if you are mixing this with something else, you try to stay away from other group 14 herbicides. Vida is kind of the same thing as M, different active ingredient by the same group, the same use rate. And this, as I mentioned, this is more like a desiccant. So it will give you very fast suppression. But I should mention that most of these contact herbicide, like the AIM, Vida, you would have to add a surfactant to it. And most of the time, they recommend a non-ionic surfactant, or you have to add a crop oil to this, and this helps get this herbicide into the plant. And I will talk about some of the, on my 2 last slides, talk about why some of these is important, especially if you're on dry land and the weeds are stressed. Reviton, as I mentioned, is a group 14 herbicide, relatively new to the market. But this will give you, it's not like your typical group 14 herbicide. You control both broadleaves and grasses. Use rate is 1 to 3 ounces an acre. If you are dealing with small weeds, you can get away with 1. But if the weeds are a little bit bigger, you'd have to go to 2 to 3 ounces. It mixes well with other chemistries like Roundup, and so you can include this for like fast acting, and it acts really fast, just like Roundup. And they recommend adding a high surfactant oil concentrate. So Superb HC is the one that one of the ones that they recommend. And if you apply with that, we've seen really good weed control in our trials and adding that surfactant to that. If you don't get good weed control, they're allowed to make sequential application, but the price for this is around $5.5 per ounce of this. And so if you apply 1 ounce, it's manageable. But if you want to go to 3 ounces, then you are trying to get into like almost $15. Hi, Corey. Your hand is up.
Now, you said Reviton likes a crop oil surfactant, but you've also said Reviton likes to be mixed with glyphosate for the best control. And my understanding is glyphosate and crop oil don't get along very well. I've always been told. Give me some thoughts on that.
Yes, that's a good point to make. If you're mixing with Roundup, you would have to go with NIS, like non-ionic surfactant for that. So we, in our trials, we either use NIS or like combination of NIS and AMS. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Corey. Gramoxone is labeled for use in crop, and so this is one of the situations where if you rely a lot on Gramoxone for in-crop weed control, then you might want to stay away from this from preplant Burndown, just because you don't want to rely on that chemistry a lot. And the use rate is around 1 to 1.5 pints an acre, around 16 to 24 ounces per acre. And this you can apply after the weeds emerge, but then it's labeled for use in weeds, and so you can apply even after the weed comes out. If you're dealing with tall weeds, example, because it's a contact herbicide, you would have to add something else to this to get a better weed control. Sharpen, it also mixes really well with glyphosate and Liberty and most of the other chemistries. Low use rate, but once again, very expensive. But I've seen value in this, especially if you have a lot of dust or the weeds are stressed. Sometimes it just pays to add some of these to your tank, and it helps like kind of get a kind of like it's kind of rupture cell membranes, and so like kind of help that herbicide get into the plant for better control. And once again, you can make sequential application. And if you apply Sharpen at high enough rate, and as I mentioned, it's expensive, you can get residual control, and so pre-emergent weed control with Sharpen as well. We all probably know Gramoxone. It's fast acting. It's a restrictive herbicide, restricted use herbicide. Relatively inexpensive, but there are a lot of like tough regulations now with Gramoxone, depending on how many acres you apply. It might have to be in the closed system, kind of like you have to be in a cap that kind of protect you from that chemistry. And so once the Fed starts adding some of those restrictions, and then probably the days are numbered. And so just kind of, if you can apply this safely, it's a good chemistry, and also mixes well with some of the other chemistry that I mentioned previously to control. This also control both grasses and broadleaf weeds. Dicamba labeled for up to 8 ounces an acre. It controls only broadleaf weeds. So to control like grassy weeds, and you would have to add something else to the tank. And it mixes well with glyphosate too. The label says you have to weed at least 10 days prior to planting, but this is labeled for use in wheat as well, grains. And so I've not seen any injury by applying this pre-plant, but it's a good chemistry to add. But once again, if you use dicamba a lot in crop, then you might want to just at least try not to rely so much on this for weed control and pre-plant. And for the grass herbicide, I just use Select Max because the grass herbicide is going to act nearly the same or similar way. Use rate is around 9 to 16 ounces. If you have perennial grasses, I think the label allows you to go up to 32 ounces. And you can make sequential application, but I think you have to wait at least 14 days because you can do the second application. I just want to mention that for these chemistries, most of the time you would have to add a surfactant or a crop oil for this to act well. And an example is in Select Max, where you have to add crop oil in most cases, or MSO, to get this to work. And because the grass herbicide, just like Axial and other, they act very slowly. So when you spray, they will stop the plant from growing, but it takes a long time to burn that to the ground. And so you have to have that patience and just know that it will kill the grass eventually, but it just takes a long time. And I mentioned that if you are in the coaxium weed production system, you're probably going to be using aggressor on that. And so you just have to then not use so much of this grass herbicide pre-plant. But then you can use some of these if the grassy weeds are your major problems. I also mentioned that if you add a group 4 herbicide to this grass herbicide, it tends to reduce efficacy. And so if you are tank mixing, please just look at the label and just see Most of these don't do well when you mix them with 2,4-D and LV6 and the other group 4 herbicides. So I'm just going to share some of the results from our pre-planned Burndown trials. And most of you have seen this already, and so you can just close your eyes or take a nap. This first, next few slides, and I'll end with some general recommendations. And if you have any questions, please feel free to interrupt me at any time. And so I'll quickly just go through these herbicide programs. And so we have Impact, which is a group 27 herbicide. It's a bleacher, kind of one component, kind of similar to one component Husky and Tylenol. And it's super expensive, but then it controls broadleaves and grasses, not too good on grasses, but just kind of looking at how to broaden kind of options. So it's not labeled for pre-plant Burndown yet, but so far we haven't seen any injury from Impact. And then we have the Reviton here and different combinations of that. We add a superb HC to this at 1.1 volume per volume. We have Gramoxone. We have Liberty. Liberty, the use rates are around 22 to 29 ounces an acre. We try to use a high end of the rate just to see if this works well, and then we can cut back the rate because we know that some of these are expensive. So if you can get good control with the lower rate, you don't want to go that high up. I just want to mention that Liberty tend to have some limitations when it comes to weed control. When it's dry and it's hot, it doesn't work so well. Some work that has been done in the past. So if you mix Liberty with Sharpen or some of those group 14 herbicide, it then kind of overcome those limitations. And so with that, you can use a lower rate and mix with Sharpen, and then you get kind of like good control even under those stress conditions. And then we have the AIM here mixed with the Gramoxone. And as I mentioned, we have Vida here too. And then the Maestro, which is bromoxynil, and then different combinations of this. And so these adjuvants we use to try to standardize them so that if there is any difference, we can attribute it to herbicide. But you can use different adjuvant labeled for these herbicides. And then from 17 to 20, where we have the Roundup, we have the regular Power Max, 22 ounces an acre, and then the Power Max, 32 ounces an acre. And we tried to replicate that for the Power Max 3, but I screwed up the rate. And so we actually sprayed around 17 ounces instead of 20 ounces per acre, and then 24 instead of 30. So the equivalent rate for the 22 ounces will be 20.7, around 21 ounces, just because of differences in active ingredients. So just keep that in mind when you begin to see some of those results. So this is a nice photo of the diversity of herbicide that we use in the trial. And so this is one of our trial sites, and I just want to mention that. So you can see the weed pressure, if I can get my laser pointer. The weed pressure here is pretty decent weed pressure. Now, as you can see, except this first plot here, we have the Impact. Everything has been smoked. And you will see that in the results that this really worked well in terms of both grassy weed control and the broadleaf that we had. We had kochia here, we had common lime sporers. Unfortunately, we don't have any ryegrass here, but we had barnyard grass, and so that's kind of an approximate herbicide weed, grassy weed, for just to give you an idea how this works. And so if you just zoom in into some of these plots, you can just see it's clean in terms of weed control in this plot. So I'm just going to jump into the results here, and as you can see here, really good weed control. Just 14 bar. 14 bar is covered part of my graph, so I would try do my best to see those things that are at the top. But you can see that really good weed control that it comes down here on the Roundup at 32 ounces. If you are using that one as your standard, really good weed control above 90%, and then it begins to drop from here. And so it's just the Impact and Reviton by themselves that didn't provide kind of the level of control that we would want for common lime spores here. And I just want to mention that if you start mixing some of these, you get really good weed control. And Liberty by itself did really well, but as I mentioned, it's pretty expensive. Mention that we screwed up on the rate. Instead of 21 ounces, we have like around 17, 24 ounces less. we still got very good weed control with the PowerMax 3. And so if they have that kind of labeled for the equivalent label for dry land, it would be a good addition if you still want to use Roundup, or if you want to pre-mix the Roundup with some of these. We try not to mix Roundup with some of these chemistries because we know Roundup works so well that if you just mix with other herbicides, just mask the effect. And so in terms of broadening your weed control spectrum, you can mix some of these chemistries. And I know that Corey mentioned in the past that one thing that product growers need is to kind of give you a list of things that you can tank mix so that people will know that, okay, I'm okay tank mixing this with this. And so hopefully in the future, we're able to do something like that so that you can know that you can mix this, and that if they are not stated on the label. And kosher control, as you can see here, once again, now Liberty with Sharpen did really well. And when it gets down here, this is a Roundup treatment, and they are doing really well. As I said, the equivalent rate here should be around 30 ounces, but even with that almost 5 ounces less, it's still the PowerMax 3 is still giving you the same control as a regular PowerMax. And so they might be right that it probably does well in dry land conditions. But it's just 1 year data, so just take it with a grain of salt. And as I mentioned, if your problem is broadleaf weeds, you have a lot of options with the Vida and Gramoxone, and even Liberty. Last year we got really good weed control for this, and Reviton by itself, once again, around that 80%. And so my thinking is that you might have to pre-mix mix Reviton with something else for weed control. And so Corey suggested I'll include dicamber in this trial this coming season. And so we'll try and throw some dicamber in with Reviton to see how that would work well, how that would work. And that would kind of also beat down the price. We can cut back the rate to see the weed control spectrum for that. Pigweed, redwood pigweed, and that was on a broadleaf weed that we had. And in general, that was more susceptible to most of the herbicide we tested compared to lamb spotters and then kosher. But you can see once again, it's just the impact that by itself that was not doing so well. Reviton here was around 90%, so that was good. And then really good control of pigweed across board for most of those mixes compared to kind of just almost similar to the Roundup treatment. And so you have a lot of options. And so please, if you need a copy of this slide after this presentation, you can let Garrett or Casey know, or you can just send me an email and I'll be more than happy to send it to you. Barnyard grass, as I mentioned, that's one of the main grasses we had. And I just want to point out that Roundup still remains one of the most effective herbicide for grass weed control. You can see out there, but Liberty is just right around the corner here. And I will show you some price charts at the end. I'll kind of help you make some of these decisions. And with Roundup prices around where they are right now, it's making some of these products a little bit more competitive for grass weed control. And we didn't have any grass herbicide only like post or select in this trial. So if we have space, we might try and throw some of that in this fall to see how that does compared to some of these mixes. And Corey was so nice to have us put out a trial on his field. And unfortunately, we only had like yellow sweet clover in that field. And I was kind of surprised when I started seeing the results. I had to go back. I went there 3 times. And so, Corey, this is just a heads up. I will probably show up next week or next 2 weeks to see how the plot look like. But this is how the untreated look like here. And this is Liberty plus Reviton. You can see I was surprised that it smoked those yellow sweet clover. And according to Corey, they didn't come back. So I'm going to take his word for it. And the Roundup didn't really touch those well. So you would have to, and I saw that he made some application. I think he threw in some Sharpen. So I think you might have to do that in those situations to have Roundup work well. But we had some good results from that. I'll share the results in a minute. So you can see here that Liberty plus Reviton, almost 100% control. You can see here the Roundup treatment were down here 40% or less control of that. And so once again, in terms of just broadleaf weed control, you have a lot of options for control. And then you have to use a price to decide whether this is worth it. Because I know like the price is always a deal breaker. So if you can get a good price on some of these, then there will be good options for control. And so this is approximate cost and for this, and then I'm not an economist, and so just take this with a grain of salt. So for impact, as I mentioned, around $15 an ounce, and the label rate is around 0.75 ounces to 2 ounces. I mean, so like if you are going to 0.75, probably it will be probably a little bit competitive. And Gramoxone is probably less expensive, and Reviton again 5.55 dollars per ounce. Liberty is around $53 per gallon. I don't know how much it is right now, but last time I checked, Roundup around 60, 65, and so in that case, as I mentioned, the rate is 22 ounces to 29 ounces, and so that's kind of competitive in terms of the price. And AM and Sharpen will be more expensive compared to Reviton and Vida, and so, but then Sharpen works well, but it doesn't control grasses, and Reviton does, and so like kind of have to make that decision if you are trying to go for either of these chemistries. And I just want to summarize this by saying that there are several options for broadleaf weed control, but when it comes to grassy weed, glyphosate still remains one of the most effective options. However, you still have that Reviton and those mixtures, especially with Gramoxone and also Liberty, would give you really good control of some of those grassy weeds. And adjuvants play a huge role. And I saw that especially on how dry last year was. And so if you are spraying and the label asks for an adjuvant, please do add, especially a water conditioner. And I would say that if you apply Roundup at 22 ounces an acre and your delivery rate is around 15 gallons an acre, the water is almost 99% of that mixture. And so it plays a huge role in deciding whether your herbicide is effective or not. So if it does ask for an adjuvant or a conditioner, please don't try to save up on that, because I might have to spray this twice, especially if it's dry and dusty like we saw last year. And I just want to add 3 last points, and that we use a lot of group 2 herbicide and group 4 herbicide for in-crop weed control. And so if that's what you do in most cases, and then I would just recommend that you try to stay away from those preplant, because if you build resistance to those chemistries, and then that limits your options. And those 2 chemistries are among the cheapest to use in grains. And so just keep that in mind. And I've seen a lot of people tell me that herbicides are not working and that it's resistant. We took samples and we didn't see any resistance issue. And the reason being that they spread probably when the weeds were too large or too big to kill. And know that stress conditions may reduce your herbicide performance. So if it's dry, if it's cold, if it's dusty, that will reduce herbicide performance. And so in those cases, adjuvants tend to play a huge role, especially the crop oils. And also throwing in some of those contact herbicide like Sharpen and others help in those situations too. With that, I would like to thank my crew for helping with most of this stuff, but I'd also like to thank the Wheat Commission and Barley Commission for providing the funding for most of these trials. I just want to say that I told Casey at the beginning of this presentation that I really enjoy working with the Wheat Commission and wheat growers, and so thank you for having me, and thank you for always ready to kind of listen to talks. And please, if you have any question, please let me know. Hi, Corey.
Hey, there's one other question in the chat I saw, but talk a little bit more about Vida. That's a completely new one to me. I have no experience with. And you said it's a desiccant like Gramoxone, or what is it exactly?
Which one? Oh, Vida.
Vida, sorry.
Yes. So Vida is a group 14 herbicide, and it's more like Sharpen than Gramoxone.
Okay.
It controls only broadleaf weeds, but it's probably the reason why you haven't heard so much about it is that it's used mostly as a desiccant, and so it acts really fast. But in terms of pricing, it's good on the price. And so if you have to go a group 14 herbicide, you might want to try that too and just see if that works for you. But yeah, it's actually fast. Group 14 herbicide.
How is it? relative to Sharpen in price and performance. It worries me how many Group 14s I'm starting to fall in love with.
So in terms of the pricing, when I last checked, it's around $4.5 dollars per ounce, compared to around $6 an ounce for Sharpen. What I haven't done is compare the two side by side and see which one is more effective. And so I can't really speak to that on their own. But as thanks mix partners, from what we saw from the trial, there seems to be not much difference between the two in terms of weed control.
Is the use rate roughly the same as Sharpen then too, that 1 to 2 ounce?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I don't know if I have it here.
I think you did. I took a picture of it. So
yeah. So it's 0.5 to 2 ounces.
Thanks, Corey. And thanks, Albert, for putting this trial together. It's a really comprehensive study, and we appreciate you putting it together and getting it in the hands of people that can use it. I'm just going to go back up to Matthew's question. What is the current herbicide resistance picture? Do you have any advice to farmers?
That's a good question, and thank you, Matthew. So in Idaho, we have Group 2, Group 4, Group 9, some resistant to glyphosate, and I think that one is just cheatgrass or downy brome that I've seen resistant to. If we import some ryegrass, maybe that might be resistant to glyphosate as well. But I think the most common I've seen is Group 2 and Group 1 resistance. We collected some wild oats from eastern Idaho last year. We screened for resistance, and we saw a lot of Group 2 and Group 1 resistance. So axial resistance and wild oats. We also saw Group 2, so gold sky, power flex resistance. We haven't seen, and I think we saw some beyond resistant to. We didn't see a lot of good control, and I think part of it is that beyond is not too good on wild oats to begin with, and so in prickle letters, Group 2 resistance, and I think for kochia we have Group 2, Group 4, and Group 9. But most of the Group 9, the glyphosate resistance I've seen is on irrigated acres. I've not seen people complain too much about dry land. And so if you have any weed that you think that, and I can share, Garrett, up to this, I have a little graph or one slide that I can share with you about kind of the current snapshot of the resistance issues that we have in Idaho. And then you can share with the group. That'll be helpful to anybody. And if there is something that is non-listed on that, I'll be more than happy to come collect sample and screen for resistance. It's free, and so we can always screen for that. And I just want to say that there is an initiative right now that I tried to talk to Garrett about, that there are some federal dollars now to just kind of do kind of herbicide resistance initiative, and it's been led by Washington State. And so I got contacted, so I'll get in touch with you to see what we can do with the commission, just to make sure that some of these issues are taken care of, that we have options for control for these growers.
Okay. Yeah, that would be great. And then I guess along the lines of efficacy, Stephen Hess has a question. What does a hard freeze the night before spraying, what does that have on the effectiveness of your weed spray?
I'm sorry, a night before spraying?
Yep, a hard freeze the night before you're out there spraying.
Oh, okay. So I mentioned when weeds are stressed, so for most of the herbicide we spray, especially the systemic one, means that they have to get absorbed and go into the plant to kill the plant. If you spray and the weeds are stressed, they won't be able to take up the herbicide. And so if you are not able to take up the herbicide, then you are not effective. They are not effective on the weeds. And so if the weeds are stressed, like there's a freezing temperature, the weeds will not take it up that much. And so you might see some reduced efficacy. So I would say that if you can wait until the weeds are actively growing, that helps to increase the effectiveness of the herbicide. And I do recommend that for those who are irrigated systems, if it's very dry, and I don't know how this year is gonna be, we saw a lot of that in sugar beet last year. if you pre-irrigate before you apply some of this herbicide, you tend to get a better weed control just because you have those weeds growing actively, and so they're able to actively take up the herbicide, and that increases efficacy.
Yeah, it kind of takes us back to Corey's first comment just on soil pH. He says, not sure if it's our pH, but I get a pretty good residual control with 2 ounces of Sharpen.
Yeah, is it 2 ounces or when? Because
I oftentimes will put 2 ounces in with Sharpen in the Burndown ahead of spring wheat if the field is dirty with Russian thistle and kochia especially, and I'm amazed how clean it is still come post application time with the Sharpen. I like you say, I love that chemical.
Yeah, thank you, Corey. Yeah, I have seen more of a clean pre-emergent control Sharpen around 3 ounces, but I would look into it and just see if kind of pH has anything to do with it. But it might be, you might be right that maybe because of the pH. I've seen more like around 3 ounces.
I know with Spartan, which is also a group 14, pH has a tremendous effect on it, and our higher pHs just exponentially increase the effectiveness of Spartan, where the rates are about half of what the label is that we have to use.
That's great. Well, thank you for that, because I didn't know that. So.
And Albert, I have a question just on my end. So you've studied a lot of these different tank mixes, a lot of different alternatives here, and gotten some pretty good control. In any of these, do we need to be more or less concerned about injury to our wheat crop? Have you considered that?
No, thanks. That's a good question. If you are spraying in crop, most of these that we've done are pre-plant, and as I said, we plant the wheat around at the stations around 3 to 4 weeks after applying this. And I went to the plot last week. I didn't see a single wheat that looks injured by any of those herbicides. And so if it is pre-plant, I have not seen any issue with kind of injury from these chemistries so far. But if it is in crop, sometimes when you have that synergism, it affects your crop that same way. And so maybe part of what Corey asked some time ago, if we can come up with a list of these herbicides that you can get to that synergism, but at the same time, you don't get kind of injury to your crop, and that's a good thing. And also just to know the flip side, things that if you mix, doesn't work well for kind of weed control.
And Nicole Sheets has a question. Can any of these alternative herbicide tank mixes qualify for use for organic farming?
No, unfortunately, no. So if you want organic farming, I have not seen a lot of organic herbicide that would control grasses. And so if you have a broadleaf weed, then there are options. The first one that comes to my top of my head is called Suppress. I don't know if it's still labeled, but it acts the same way as most of our group 14 herbicide and like Gramoxone. So you have to go when the weeds are very small, and if you spray, you get pretty good burn down for those kind of broadleaf weeds. For grasses, I'm not quite sure about for broadleaf weeds. You do have options for pre-plant burn down, and I can once again, if you need kind of that, I can send you maybe a list of 2 or 3 herbicides that I know of we sprayed in the past that tend to work okay for pre-plant burn down.
Okay, great. Well, maybe just a couple more questions. Can you touch on the direction that you're going to take this study for this year, for 2022?
Yeah, that's a good question too. I know that for one, Corey suggested we add dicamba to this, and we are going to do that. And I would also like to add just a grass herbicide. And also, one of the commissioners, I don't remember the person's name, suggested that we add Northern Idaho to the trial. And so John Campbell on campus will be doing the Northern Idaho trial, just trying to capture some of that ryegrass to see if this work well for ryegrass as well. And then, as I mentioned, most of the chemistries are pretty expensive, and we try to go with the optimum or the high end of the rate. And so I would like to try and just cut back the rate towards the low end to see whether we still get good control from cutting back the rate a little bit, because once it's expensive, I don't expect growers to apply 2 ounces if they can get the same control with 1 ounce per acre.
Great. So in terms of getting the word out, do you have any upcoming events that you'd like to make us aware of for wheat growers?
Yes. So we are trying to restart our annual wheat tour this year. So it's gonna be June, I think, 22nd. I can send you the date. But we would have quite a lot of trials to show, and we have at least 5 to 8 wheat trials to show that tour. So if you are in the area or you can come, please do to see some of those things that we're doing, some of these trials that we have. And I should mention that last year, most of the calls I got were about wild oats. And so we have some industry trials just looking at some options you have if you have group 1, group 2 resistant wild oats. And so just to see some trialates and then how long you can wait to incorporate that and how well it works for wild oat control. So please, if you have time, come join us in June to talk about weeds.
Great.
All right. Thank you so much, Albert. There's one question. Steve had a follow-up. I'm not sure if you saw it. How long after a 26-degree night is the plant considered actively growing?
Oh God, I have no idea. That's a good question. And I would say that if you go to the field and you see the weeds, they are not bending over or looking weird. And I would say they are growing actively. I know, especially in East Idaho, when it can freeze anytime, it's hard. And so if it's, you think that the temperature has been low for a while, I would try and avoid spraying early in the morning, just to kind of have those kind of, once it warms up enough and then you see that, okay, it's warm enough that you can walk without your sweatshirts on, I think you should probably be good to go. As Corey mentioned, you probably have to bump up the rate. And also I've seen that in those stress conditions, when you add some of those contact herbicide, like the Sharpen and the Reviton and then the Vida and AIM, what those does that those raptor cell membranes will kind of help that herbicide get into the plant a little bit better than they would without it. So I would say if you can wait, please do till it warms up enough. But if not, you have to wait maybe in the afternoon and also add some of those contact herbicide.
All right. Thank you so much again, Albert, for joining us today. We really appreciate your time. And just a reminder to all of you who are on that our next From the Field will be Thursday, May 26th. We're talking about Idaho water outlook and the drought. Not a really happy conversation probably, but should be a good one. So go ahead and join us for that. The registration will be up on our website at idahowheat.org later today. And if you want to go back and listen to or watch or share this episode of From the Field, you can do that through our YouTube channel, which is Idaho Wheat, or on Apple or Spotify podcasts or anywhere you listen to your podcasts. So you can search for Idaho Wheat on there as well. So thank you again. Thank you again, Albert and Garrett, for helping with question and answer and leading that out. And we will see you next month.
Thank you for having me. Thank you all for joining.
Thanks, everyone.